Well, we're not
Chaker.
live. Live
Oh,
means we're live streaming.
that's
This
true.
is
That's true.
recording. Anything we say can and will be edited if
Oh, I
That's
necessary.
true.
I feel I'm in the police station.
Would it be the first time, Shakir, or not?
No, it won't be the
So you want to
In,
elaborate a bit about that?
in fact, I just got a call like an hour before this interview where a police station in Beirut is asking me to come by because
Oof.
I am in legal lawsuit case with the hospital where my mom got her medical treatment. So I'm actually going to the police station uh, on Monday, I think, or Tuesday, my lawyer said. So yeah, you guys
Um,
predicted it right.
wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry
Sadly,
about that, Shakir.
unfortunately, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's
So what's gonna happen? Are you gonna spend a few nights in Makhfar Hbesh, or
why.
how's it gonna go?
No. I won't be spending any. I'm just going with my lawyer to answer whatever questions they want me to answer.
I
Mm.
heard like usually the interrogation processes are just very silly. They just put you in a chair, but like sweat
Well,
you out, and then later on they'll come and ask you a few questions. But especially in Lebanon, they're not very organized with it. I don't
well,
know
I'm
how.
going. I'm going to defend my mother's case and the case of a lot of patients
Mm-hmm.
who are victims of corruption or malpractice. So I think just thinking of the victims and thinking of my mom, I don't think a chair is going to be my issue, or a couple of techniques that may work in other situations won't work with mine.
I'm sorry, Shakir. Yeah, during COVID, my uncle-in-law, he got COVID and he got a bit sick, but then he went to the hospital and then he got a disease in the hospital, and that disease ended up killing him. May his soul rest
Uh,
in peace.
Sorry to
You
hear.
know, Lebanon. Yeah, I know, but it's
Yeah,
like it's not okay for like this kind of thing to be swept under the rug. When
Yeah.
it comes to people's lives and health, and when you trust doctors, you trust the medical system,
Hmm.
but they let you down once again. What is it? It's not news, dude. It's not
Yeah.
freaking politics. It's healthcare, dude.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of doctors do a great job. A lot of nurses do a great job. And then you get like, a person who doesn't, or who doesn't work with full medical ethics or the least standards of medical professionalism. And then you get a victim, and then it's a cycle from there.
yeah.
So sorry for your uncle, Ali, and hope mom
Thanks,
gets
Shaka.
better.
I
Yeah.
hope
Let's
that. I
now
hope
move
she
the
does.
podcast away from the police stations, please.
Gotcha. Inshallah khair. Shakir, yeah, exactly. So, what do you want to talk about more so on this pod? I mean, we're prepared for it, but we all grew up in Lebanon and we all have it. But is there something on your mind right now for like a trending
I
thing,
mean,
or yeah,
I do have a new book coming out
nice.
in a month from now. It's called Arikaz. So I'd like to put some,
What's
content
it
out there.
about? Yeah, what is it?
So Arikaz is about a Lebanese guy in the year 2048.
Okay.
The world is just recovering from a cyber pandemic. And this guy, who's the son of a janitor and his mom has worked all her life as a maid, he loses his parents during the cyber pandemic. He decides to sign up for this experiment taking place in Neom in Saudi, where the experiment is about letting the human go back in memories since they were in their mother's womb and
Mm,
rewatch all their life's memories without forgetting any detail, using the biotechnology and
mm-hmm.
using as well AI and all the software available in year 2048. And Sharif signs up for this experiment under the supervision of Dr. Atkinson. But something goes wrong at the beginning of this experiment where he finds himself in a different womb than his mother's. Um, and it happens to be that the mother is Lebanese and the father is an Israeli. And you will have to read the book to see what takes on in that experiment and what happens to this guy and to Dr. Atkinson, to Sharif, to Nur, and to Nadav.
That's very
Wow.
interesting how you made a couple that are you wouldn't ever expect it for them to be together. A Lebanese and an Israeli
I've
couple.
never heard of that before.
Exactly.
Paco, have you heard of such thing?
Yeah, I have. I can't remember the where or when, or I read it somewhere, or but I have.
It's
Like,
like a unicorn, dude. Yeah, exactly. I've never heard of it.
no, I have actually, and my story is, although it's sci-fi and it's in the future and
Hmm.
everything, but it is based on a lot of true events, and the events of Nur and Nadav are based on true events.
Yeah, I've noticed in your previous books, in general, you tend to take different stories that you've heard over time, and then obviously add a little twist to it, maybe just change a few things, and you have like this certain knack for adding a bit of fiction, but to make it more interesting in it, so
Mhm.
that people can be more interested in the story and like really flow into it. So, what are the? I want to understand like your mind, your thought process of when you're making these you're making these characters, you're creating these stories. How are you able to just add a few, maybe just add a few paragraphs or a few stories that are changing the original one?
Well, the process always starts with a real story. So there is a story that would come to my attention, or I would read about it, or someone would tell me about it,
Hmm.
that I would find it interesting to write a book about. So that's the first thing, is the original story. Now, I do my research and my homework around the story. So whether that's interviews or like doing further looking into it. In this case, with the case of Arikaz, the original story that came to my attention is a very minor story when it came to the final product. Because, well, it's not minor, it's just like not the focus of the book, because this is where I think creativity, and this is what my job as a writer is to build worlds. And I'm
Hmm.
taking the original story, but a story alone, it might work in certain cases. For me, I like that creative element to be added, and to build that, the art of building the world around characters that exist or characters that you invent. So, for example, in my story, now in my new book, Nur, Nadav, and Sharif, three main characters, are based on real people. So now I might change something in them, or but they're based on real people. I can always think of the person they're based on. Dr. Jenny Atkinson is a completely like fictional character that I got inspired after the creation of this character by specifically one person. But this is inspiration to feed the fictional character creation. So that's my process usually. And then once you start the writing, they become like family members. These are characters that live with you. You spend all day and all night writing their dialogue, thinking what they think, feeling what they feel. So it becomes organic and natural as the process continues until completion, until you say goodbye to them.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
shit. Please, Paco.
Bye,
That's
Paco.
okay, Paco. Best of luck with your emergent. Sorry. Allah Mac, bro. We're sending our thoughts and prayers your way.
Sorry,
Okay.
1 second, guys. I'm just gonna send a quick note
That Paco left.
for now that
to your agent. This guy Paco, he just dropped from this call. Family emergency. No. Yeah. So
He probably got a call from the makhfar or something.
maybe from
from the makhbar. All right, Shaka. What I want to know is like, okay, so how hard is it to be creative when you're living such a stressful life? I know growing
well,
up
yeah.
in Lebanon, is hard enough on its own with all these challenges, and you're always short circuited. You're always someone's gonna annoy you 20 times in a day. There's always something scary gonna happen. Your brain power is just trying to fight for survival. So how do you even have the brain capacity to be creative? You know what I mean? When
Mhm.
you're in survival mode.
Well, with my work, I live in a lot of places and I move around a lot of places. Now, recently, I've been in Lebanon for personal reasons. But you can experience the same kind of stress and pressure, whether you're in New York, Toronto, Beirut, Dubai, anywhere. This is life. This is the 2020s. for me, usually when we get stressed, sometimes we go to the gym, sometimes, which I do, and I love the gym. Sometimes some people eat, some people, you find ways to cope with your stress in the way that you're comfortable with. Writing is one of those ways. I always say, like, writing is like praying. It's that time where you're alone. You're with, when you're praying, you're with God. When you're writing, you're with your characters and you're in your world. So it's a break from what you're talking about, and it's not something for me that stops, you know, you from pursuing that creative, effort.
Do you have any
Yeah.
like traditions or routines you do when you're writing? Like you write at a certain time every night. You have something to eat or drink or something, or what
I
time you're
love
sitting where, doing what?
So I love my white wine while writing. So there's white wine involved. I love music and certain people only, like certain artists,
Hmm.
um, and what else? And I like the night. So usually I like working late nights into the morning. And there's that very nice feeling during the writing times when you see the sun coming out and you're like, okay, it's time now to sleep. The world is awakened. My world has to sleep. So it's a nice kind of feeling for me.
Yeah, I find it very interesting how you compare writing with prayers, and I heard that in a previous interview you did. My question would be on that is obviously in praying, sometimes people like to ask for something in their prayers. So I want to ask you, have you asked anything during your writing? Have you asked something from your writing or during your writing in general? Like,
I
what have you
always
asked?
ask my characters, like, why are you doing this to me? Just be smarter, be faster. Yeah, that's, I think, the dialogue I have with my characters is gets real, and the more white wine you have, the more real it gets. So yeah.
You start hallucinating.
All right, so Shaka, what I really want to know because I grew up in Jazeera, and right behind my house there was like a Palestinian area. Yeah, exactly. There were different kinds of houses and low income places. But what goes on in the Palestinian locales?
I mean, in Palestinian camps, it's like every community. There are families and there is social relationships. There are kids playing. There are like So for me, it's like life, but in a 1 kilometer square area.
Mm.
That my experience back in the 90s. Now challenges, sure, more, and I'm talking about the early 1990s, where you still had to. We would go, me and my brother, walk to get the water in buckets and bring it back home from the Khazan, from the water
Wow.
supply.
Uh-huh.
These things, for other people, water is running at home easy. We drink
Mm-hmm.
water is there. These challenges are there on many levels. So if we're talking about living in the camp, I don't like usually essentializing it a lot because it is. Sorry, guys, my email is still on. So do you want me to turn it off if the
Yes,
sound?
please.
Sorry for
Yes,
that.
please.
I thought I closed everything. Should I
No, it's
repeat this?
okay. Yes, repeat the sentence. We'll edit it. And yeah,
Sorry. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I usually don't like centralizing the concept of camps, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a community with challenges and unfortunate circumstances. And for me, and I talk about it a lot in my book, Ouch, I think camps should not exist. I think the solution to any refugee crisis should be centered around not having camps, because camps are like prisons. Living in a camp, you do feel the imprisonment once you want to be in touch with the world, and that's why I think camps should not exist.
So what would
Okay.
be the replacement for a camp? Because
Mm-hmm.
obviously the refugees come in numbers. They don't come in like small quantities. They don't come like five, ten groups of 10. No, they come in waves of hundreds, sometimes
I
thousands.
mean,
And
remember when you
then
were in high school, Lebanon, bro, with the Syrian crisis? We just had all of a sudden
exactly
many like
Mhm.
Syrian people
within a
moving
couple
in.
of years, we had a
Yeah.
million.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So the first answer to this question is a refugee should return back home.
Right.
So this is usually like the concept. If you ask me the question on globally, that's the immediate answer. Now, if
Yeah.
I talk about the Palestinian refugees specifically, I
Mm-hmm.
think right now going back home, the right of return is not very feasible
Mm-hmm.
because it involves a lot of stakeholders and a lot of parties that need to come up to many agreements that have taken so far over 70 years and could take, we don't know. So for a refugee here, how fair is it that while the big guys are playing out on the political playgrounds, that he or she has to sit in a prison without the right to work, the right to exist, without the right conditions? This is not fair. So the answer to this specific Palestinian situation is the right to resettle somewhere where, like I did, like many Palestinians did, where you immigrate, a country takes you, empowers your skills, makes you, an economic contributor to the country and to, to the global economy, and build a life there. And when the
Mm-hmm.
big guys are done negotiations, are done their political games, their tricks, their whatever, you know, you would then have the choice to return home or to stay in the home you have chosen, in the home that hosted you with love, with opportunities, etc. So that's my answer to the Palestinian refugee section.
Hmm. I agree on that concept. Basically, it's the assimilation of the refugees into the general population. But at the same time, you always have these major stakeholders that will always say that obviously they would be complaining about the presence of these refugees, claiming that they're going to increase crime rates, which is statistically not true. And they complain about how they take the jobs from the locals, which is also not true because usually they take the jobs that the locals don't want as well. So there are countries that have shown progress in that. Some in Europe, some in the Middle East, but then there are other nations that are completely against it. That they don't accept the presence of refugees. For example, you have the UK when there's like this idea of wanting to send the refugees that are coming by the boats to a different nation in Rwanda and keep them in
Mm-hmm.
prison camps there. I
Ooh.
mean, how is that a logical choice? Why would you shift the responsibility that you have for these refugees and just throw it upon another nation that is a developing nation as well? And they might not have the resources to do it.
Well, here we're talking about something completely separate, but they interconnect because it does affect, as you are saying, the refugee crisis, which is the narrative of xenophobia, of hate, of
Mm-hmm.
something happening in our world. A lot of people are fighting it. Um, it is something that, that does affect policies in certain areas, sadly, and we've seen it in a lot of examples. And that's what a lot of great people at the UN, a lot of great people in many great governments are working towards a solution for this. But it is a problem as well. So you have the refugee crisis is a world problem today, and you have this narrative, this xenophobia, this narrative of hate, this fear of the other, this closed border, agenda. You have that also as an issue happening in the world. And again, the big guys and the big gals on the political playground have to find a solution for it. And until
Mm-hmm.
then, sadly, you see how it affects lives.
Mm-hmm. But the big guys are the ones that are driving fear. They're the ones that are controlling the news media outlets that are making you scared of one another. In reality, look,
Yeah.
we're all just human beings. There's nothing to be scared of other than this fake narrative in your head that this person's gonna do this or that. You know, the only thing to fear is fear itself. I know that's cheesy, but it's true. It's like
Yeah, but
we're
this
all
is
we're all human beings, and there's nothing to be scared of. I promise you.
yeah, and this is what you should have in mind when you go for to vote next time. And this is to raise awareness about this, and for people
Mm-hmm.
when we go choosing our next leaders to be aware of this. And there's a lot of us who are doing work on the ground, including you guys with this podcast, bringing all sort of people to it, in my writings or book tours or my company. Like, we have to do individual things. We have to do try to be the change within our own circles first. Then
Mm-hmm.
eventually it's going to come together again. Could be a year, could be 10, could be 100, but I do have faith in humanity usually overall.
Mm-hmm. Love to hear that.
Good. I'm
You
being
have.
optimistic today, Shway.
Yeah, let's do it.
No, we
Um,
want optimism. That's how we make people start working together and start caring about each other. Because if everyone just ends up being pessimistic, they're just gonna let their intrusive thoughts take control of them
Hmm.
and make them always think negatively of one another, of their neighbors or their friends or just everyone they interact with.
Yep.
yeah, I would say there is a clear path forward in my eyes, and it's education and spreading awareness and
Mhm.
educating young people. Because young people grow and they become in power too. So,
Absolutely.
us by doing this podcast and meeting with you and you writing your books, hello, people are waking up bit by bit. It's grassroots, and then
Yeah.
they learn that we're actually way more similar than we think, and then hopefully the wars end. Wars I feel like are artificial. They're not really like right now the Ukraine-Russian war. Is driven by economics. It's very political and economical. And I'm
Well,
sorry about what's happening
like
in Palestine. Yeah, but it's the same
it's
thing too.
driven
I
by a
feel like.
lot of factors. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is clear that for me, like if you bring up the Russia-Ukraine war, I just think of all, like my family lived in Ukraine, my dad and my brothers,
Oh
and they had
wow.
to they had to relocate to Sweden. They had to go through the refugee journey again.
Ooh.
I think, and this is a war launched on Ukraine unjustifiably, and there are, I think feel for every Ukrainian refugee today, and I see how the greed is what drives the hunger for power, the all these elements together with economy and other things, of course, they come together, and this is the solution. This is the end result.
Hmm. And so you said how your brothers and your dad had to live the refugee life again.
Mhm.
And a statement popped in my head when you said that. And I wanted to get your perspective on it. Once a refugee, always a refugee. Do you agree with this statement, or what is your opinion on it?
Once a refugee, always a refugee. I I said that statement like so but I said it back in 2015,
Mm.
and this is like, I
Maybe we're just
was
good at our research. I don't know.
no, no, no. And now when you ask it to me in 2023 and seeing, because the last 7 years we've seen a lot of, boats are drowning in the Mediterranean. We're seeing atrocities came out of Syria, of Yemen, of so many countries, Iraq, etc. So I hope we get to a day where we don't have refugees, but I could agree with the statement, once a refugee, always a refugee, because you'll always have a sweet spot for the concept of home, the concept of the journey that you take. There is a sweet spot for it. So, sure, once a refugee, always a refugee. I said it in 2015, I said it again in 2023.
Do you think diaspora could relate to refugees in some way, because they are also living abroad, and obviously it is by choice, not
Yeah.
it's not involuntary, but they also have that sweet spot that you're talking about, where they want to go back and stay back in their homes, in their
Mhm.
original country.
Well, everyone relates to refugees, not only so the diaspora could relate here with
Hmm.
yearning to go back home, the homesickness, etc. But everyone can find something in common with a refugee. I mean, we refugees are not aliens, so we same planet for sure. So there must be something in common between every refugee and every human being out there.
Something that I found interesting is you lived in a refugee camp, and then you were able to get out, have a citizenship in a different country, and like make it out, and then start writing. But then when you started writing, you also started going back to refugee camps and doing interviews there. So I wanted to see how your perspective shifted, because you went from being in the camp and maybe even being interviewed by reporters, then becoming the reporter who's interviewing these refugees.
Hmm.
So seeing both sides, what can you share in that experience from your?
Um, so I grew up with a lot of reporters coming in, and they they kind of trained me as a kid. I would go with Andrea and Rebecca, and they would do their interviews, and I would see how they're doing it, and they would talk to us. And so this was part of my upbringing, to be surrounded by the power of storytelling. Um, because a refugee has very little things in life, one of which is the power of the story that he or she have lived, or their own story. Um, as now someone going to camps to do interviews for the Confessions of a War Child books and for my articles in the HuffPost, it was I was like that kid again, but on the other side. And I had to remember things that bothered me and not do them. So that was really good because I've been on the other side. So you never take a picture without explaining where this picture is going and if they have consent. You always let the person tell the story their own way without having to provoke certain areas to get a scoop. And that was reflected in my writings and in my articles. And you let someone, you know, that this is hard. This is hard for someone to relive a lot of non-happy moments in their life, and that shouldn't be a sensual headline or simplified to a sensual headline. That should be the energy and the fuel of your writing as a writer on the other side.
It's I'm very curious about that, about how people in general tend to find a certain passion in what might have either been traumatic for them growing up, or maybe just part of their upbringing, and it gets this passion for them to make a career out of it. I and obviously this has been a part of your life. It's part of your career because that's your upbringing. And for me, it was politics. I always found something interesting about politics, and that's because I guess I just like to talk a lot, and I always like to debate. I like to argue, and that's why I went into politics for my degrees. So yeah, just wanted to share that and see if you had the thought about it.
Yeah, like who are everyone, your story is what makes who you are later. If it is the story of a little person interested in engineering and buildings and they made it into becoming an engineer, that's their story. And if it's about a writer who as a kid loved the stories of his surrounding, and sure, I mean, I like how passion is part of someone's identity, and what you just said is the definition of that.
Um, Shaker, I want to know, like, when you go
Sorry,
back.
can I do a water break? Can I go get my bottle of water?
Yes,
Good.
but you interrupt me, but not Saeed. Okay. We'll be right back after these commercials. We'll be
Please
right.
keep this.
We'll be right back after a statement from our sponsors.
Okay.
Oh my god.
Part two.
All right, and مرحب بكم سيداتي وساداتي. We're back with Shaker. Is it Khazal?
Khazal, yeah.
All right, so I get very emotional, let's say, from this story, and I'm just seeing it from your experience and your writings, and yeah, it makes me just feel very grateful, that I have this great life with a great family and great friends and electricity and water and
Mhm.
shelter, the ability to fly. It makes me feel really, grateful. What do you think about when you do your interviews and meet all these people? How does it make you reflect on what you have in your life?
Well, gratitude is one of the first feelings. I also feel grateful today for where I am, and when you see people in general, like as you just said it, like there are a lot of blessings we can have, and we just need to look at them and know what they are and appreciate them and let them be the support system for our lives.
Okay, and when you go back and you revisit these really hard places to go to, how does it not like bring up tough emotions for you? You know, just going back and hearing these stories, and you're interviewing people and you're hearing really dark stories. Man, I mean, I salute you for doing it. You know, I'm glad you're doing it because it's not anyone can do it. You know, you have really like a strong mindset to do it, and I promise you, most people are way too sensitive, and most people will not will give up really quickly.
Mhm.
Versus you, you're able to go and go and go, and it drives you, and you're able to get these stories and share them and show us into a world we've never seen before. And I feel way more connected to your story and the Palestinian refugees because of it. So thank you for what you're doing, and yeah, we need
Thank
more of it, dude. And I'm happy to highlight, and I'm happy to
you. Something,
hear
Ali, that
more.
when I'm seeing these stories again, it's a lot of feelings that come out. So there
Mm-hmm.
is a felt, of course, of gratitude for life today. There's a feeling of sorrow and sadness for the people because they're still waiting for something to happen. Um, and I feel sometimes anger as well that we're letting people stay in prisons for all this period of time just for because of their crime is the identity they were born into. So
Mm-hmm.
um, all these feelings, again, as a writer, you're creating, all these feelings fuel your writing, and this is important to acknowledge these feelings and important to also let it reflect genuinely and honestly into your writings.
Right, and you've been to Palestine now at this point, right?
Yeah, I've been to
What's
Palestine.
what's the difference between the Palestine and the Palestinian camps in Lebanon? What would you say have better conditions?
Conditions wise, it depends where in Palestine. I mean, the people
Mm-hmm.
in Gaza are in a prison in Gaza, under the rule of a militia. And it's hard for them. I mean,
Oof.
people in the West Bank, they are, under the rule of a corrupt authority, and they have so much restrictions from Israel. So I mean, it depends where, the Palestinians living in, everyone has challenges. But I like something about the Palestinians is wherever you go, it's the same food, the same talk, the same. So this I think is in common between everyone.
So Shakir, I know that you also constantly visit Palestine, but which part of Palestine do you usually go to?
Can't talk about this right
Yeah, not cannot
Okay.
disclose. Moving on.
Location can't be this. Okay.
now.
Moving on. Yeah.
I mean, Shakir, I've always thought that it's not allowed to. I thought people from Palestine don't have citizenship to travel to go to places. Is that true, or did I make that up in my head?
No, it is true. When you have in the case of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon or Syria, they have a travel document. They don't even have a passport, which has some issues sometimes obtaining visas. So yeah, of course, Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, they have to go through checkpoints by the Israelis. They have to get permits to leave. So yeah, it is challenges. Travel challenges are there.
So there's no Palestinian passport, right?
There is a Palestinian passport for people living in the
Gotcha.
West Bank and Gaza, I believe. Yeah.
So how did you get to travel to Canada and the United States, and you
So
were
I'm a
like invited on a visa? Oh,
no, no, I had a scholarship from Canada. I became a Canadian citizen. I am a Canadian citizen, proud of my Canadian,
woo!
my
Are you
Canadian
sure no
part
one's
of
holding
my
you against?
identity as much as I'm.
No one's
Sorry.
forcing. No one's forcing you to say that right now. Is there a
No, no
Canadian?
one's no. Are the
So
nicest people
Canada,
in the world,
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The Canadians are good. Yeah.
the best.
Uh huh. So yeah, so the first time you flew is when you went from Lebanon to Canada, right?
Yeah, the first flight was to Toronto in 1999 or year 2000 or 1997, I believe. I was 7 years, yeah, 10 years old. Yeah.
Wow. What was that
Wow.
like
I'm
for
going,
you?
I'm going old now. I'm forgetting.
What was that like for you to travel for the first time?
I was super excited. I mean, the plane, I always saw the planes above the camp, but I never thought I would be on one of them on my way to the camp, on my way out of the camp. And I knew, and I remember even as a kid, I believe, yeah, I told my dad or my mom that I hope I don't come back. So, and that was shocking for them because, that's the last thing a father or a mother want to hear their kid saying. But having the parents who I have, I knew they understood why I said that, and I think today they do understand uh, very well.
Yeah.
So based on this, you said your mom is in Lebanon, and then your dad and your brothers somehow were in Ukraine, and now they're in Sweden.
Yeah,
At
my
what
dad is
point?
now in Lebanon due to my mother's illness, but yeah,
Okay, so and at what point did everyone just diverge? So you already went to Canada first.
yeah,
You were the first to leave, right?
yeah. I was the first to leave out of my family, and then my dad had to go. I think in the early 2000s or mid 2000s to Ukraine because he had lived in Russia and Ukraine for some part. He knew the language, etc. So he wanted to settle there, bring the family, and yeah. And my mom is a professor, so she was teaching a lot in Lebanon, and she would travel back and forth. But that's the story of Palestine, of Arabs. I think of all the Levant, we are everywhere, and I bet
Everywhere.
an uncle. I bet I have an uncle down the street from Ali, and Ali has an uncle.
Probably not. That's a good chance. What does your mom teach, by the way?
Psychology.
Oh, that's really cool. Wow. I mean, no wonder you have such a strong mindset. Must have learned it from your mom.
Yeah,
That's good.
mom taught me a lot as a kid. So yeah, for sure.
How did she help you through all this? Because I feel like part of parents is to try to shelter their kids from what's around them, and when you're living in a Palestinian camp, there's a lot to be shielded from.
Well, I'm lucky to have been raised by the mom I have because she's one of the survivors of Sabra and Shatila massacre. So she had dealt with trauma and knows what trauma is. She was studying psychology, which is
Hmm.
a very important, side of displacement. She is an activist who has an organization that hires hundreds of Palestinian women called Women's a Humanitarian Organization. So I grew up at a home where my mom is this figure and living in a camp and everything, but always knowing that it will get better when you work so much hard on it and when you believe in it. And I had that from her. Um, Hard to speak about mom today because, so
Yeah.
I'm going to take a
Yeah.
short break and come back to you
Nah.
guys.
Of course, man.
I'm going to do a cigarette break and I'll be back.
We'll be back after these brief messages.
Oh, I want to act in my 40s or 50s, not now. Now I want to write and I want to run businesses and I want to travel the world. And yeah,
But some of
and
your
Okay.
books could really be turned into movies, and like really, and
You're in
the
LA, Ali. Take my books and go shopping around.
yeah, I mean that's not a bad idea, honestly, Sarahatan, because that's what it is, dude. It's the stories they give you a perspective and a window into life you've
Yeah,
never seen or heard before. Those are the best movies when it's not the same blockbuster movies you see all the time. Those are like candy,
yeah.
But like when you see something and you see an original story, oh wow, it's like
So I'll see you
unique
at the next pod.
perspective.
I'll see
we
you at the
need
next.
we need more Palestinian stories because there's not too many, and yeah, and it's so like the world's invisible to it. I think of like the Palestinian struggle, the Uyghur struggle. Like all these people
No,
around the
the
world.
but here I want to just weigh in because the world is it's not invisible to the world. It's very visible. I mean, everything is visible these days.
Right.
It's just how the world is ready to deal with such a matter or a crisis or a cause or and you know what, I do respect every opinion. So when you have an issue, we're humans, you're going to have 10 different opinions.
Hmm.
I respect all these 10, but as long as your opinion is not violating laws, is not violating humanity, is not hurting lives, then your opinion should be part of the solution. If your opinion is violating a law anywhere or doing these atrocities, then no, your opinion should not be part of this solution. And but it's not invisible to you; it's visible. But you
Hmm.
chose not to have, you chose to have this opinion, and sadly, it's not part of this cause or the path
Right.
for a resolution.
Most people, though, they're not willing to put themselves to educate themselves on different things around the world. Most people have their own things to worry about, unless they're force fed like this issue, and unless it's like the trendy issue of the day, it's like most people actually forget about it completely.
Mhm.
And so I really do think it's like with some awareness, yeah, people can start to understand. The Uyghur situation is just horrible. The Uyghurs are in camps, concentration camps too. And
Yeah, I was there in Bangladesh in Cox's Bazar a few years back, and it's sad when you see, like, with the Uyghurs, especially, like how many times they've been displaced and uh, the horrific, treatment they've been through. So yeah, and if you look at the Syrians, the Palestinians, every refugee population is a victim of politics, is a victim of dictatorship, is a victim of a lot of things that should not be happening.
hmm and then I don't know why it becomes bad to not bad, but scary to voice your opinion on some of these things. I don't feel scared at all to talk about these issues, but I know a lot of people are scared to talk about voice their opinions on any of these matters because of, I guess, repercussions. I noticed you self censored a little bit too. So, what's your thoughts on censorship? Yeah.
Well, in a perfect ideal world, there's no censorship. The
Hmm.
world we live in is not perfect and ideal. And we know that. We've been talking during this interview about a zillion, like, horrible things that do happen in the world. Now, we have I have made this system around myself where I I will voice my opinion, but sometimes, and most of the time in my case, you have to do it in a very diplomatic way, because my end goal is not to create more trouble. My end goal is a resolution.
Hmm.
Resolutions don't come, in my experience, and your experience could be very different, but in my
Hmm.
experience, diplomacy is such an important path to a
Hmm.
resolution. Dialogue is such an important path, and I know
Hmm.
in order to foster a really good dialogue, you need all parties involved to gather around the table, to do a minute of yoga, and then talk. And I like this
Bro.
minute of yoga, and that's so. Am I censored? Sure, there are a few things that you can't say it the way because you're also, again, if you want to sit with the other party, you don't want the other party to hurt you, and you don't want to hurt the other party. Your end goal is not to be hurting one another. Your end goal is a resolution to the problem at hand. So I wouldn't call it censorship in my case. I would call it, the art of reaching a resolution about.
Mhm.
It's
Uh,
interesting about the meditation and the yoga thing you mentioned before the meetings. I know there was this Ali with
You
his
and your
wake up
music.
call.
my alarm. Yeah.
So I know there's
Carry on.
I don't know if it was the Romans or the Turkish, where they in their culture they used to have always they would have two meetings when they want to do business. One was either over food and wine. Yeah, sorry, one was over food and wine, and one was when they're sober. And obviously, you see the different perspectives of the people in that meeting come out. When you're sober, you're gonna have that clenched up, reserved type of approach to the meeting. But then later on, when you're having food and wine and you're just talking and chilling and having fun, you tend to open up a bit more, be more mindful, relax a bit. So your intentions can change and your reactions can change. So I feel like people should be more willing to do that kind of approach so that they can just relax a bit. People
Mhm.
just don't relax. That's the issue.
Yeah.
Well, with that, I'm always inspired by someone, I worked with, Ariana Huffington. because she was all about like sleep. She's all about, the importance of rest and sleep and etc. And recently I've gotten meditation from a friend of
Nice.
mine. And yeah, it's
Wow.
important. The world is so chaotic right now that we have to find this always this minute of peace and harmony.
And also, people, I think, more than ever are more like scared of each other and afraid of each other, not just in the topics we're talking
We
about,
were
but
locking cages for 2 years, Ali, during the pandemic. It got worse. We're just newly released people out to the world. Like,
everyone's anxious, afraid to talk to each other, afraid of hurting each
it'll
other's
take
feelings,
time to heal. Yeah, it'll take time to heal, but
Yeah, exactly. Can't wait for us to get back together. But one of the things, Shaker, that I felt like I connected with you on is that we're reading your book. You have a brother named Hadi, and I have a younger brother named Hadi, and I miss my brother a lot. Honestly, I
I
haven't
miss
seen
my
him in a
brother
long time.
too.
Yeah, and it's like I can't wait to see him soon. But yeah, it's like small details like that. And just that
Mhm,
we have a sibling with the same name, and it makes me feel more of a humanity towards you, and that's why I feel like really like
mhm,
we need to get to know each other more on like a deeper, more personal basis. We all have a lot more in common than we think.
absolutely.
That was no
Yeah.
coincidence, Ali. This was meant to be.
Oh.
Well,
That's
statistically
very
speaking,
sweet.
though, how many Arabs are named Hadi? So don't feel too special.
Statistically.
All right, Shakir, I wanted to ask you about Sabra and Shatila. Is there a story behind what happened there? Do you know about what happened there since you know about it a bit closer than others? Yeah,
Well, there was a massacre, and
right.
a lot of civilians were massacred. Um, and Ariel Sharon was pending trial for was part of a trial, and it never went anywhere because he died eventually. And but no, Sabra and Shatila is still a camp. Did go, you know, through a massacre, and a lot of civilians lost their lives in a horrific way. And I, it's happening. The memorial of it is this month, and we'll always think of the victims of Sabra and Shatila massacre and hope that justice and closure for their families one day would be served.
What's it like in the day of a life of someone who went through something like that?
I didn't go through it. I wasn't born during Sabra and Shatila. It's just my mom, and she would always bring it up. She worked as a nurse at a hospital in Sabra and Shatila and how she escaped and all this. She would always talk about the story, and she would always relive it. And you know,
It's unfortunate
Mm-hmm.
that this was more this was a political decision as well, not only just an assault on citizens. Because I know there was certain Lebanese factions involved with the Israeli army that was
mhm.
responsible for this, where they worked together to commit this crime, this hate crime, sorry, and this massacre. And it doesn't make sense how people are willing to make this kind of decision. They How do you remove this level of empathy from your decision on who you're attacking, no matter what? Like, even if you're in a you're in in a war case,
Mm-hmm.
how are you capable of making this act out of without any remorse?
Well, that what you just said is the definition of the ugly reality of war, and just yeah, the lack of. I mean, war is an ugly thing. It brings a lot of ugliness out of a lot of people, and who pays the price? It's innocent lives. I think we should work, and we are. I mean, a lot of people are working towards ending a lot of wars, but we see more wars happening, and it's
Yeah.
sadly it is part of this planet. And we can just hope and pray that one day we have no wars again in an ideal world.
Yeah. What do you think, Said? I think it's possible to end the wars?
I do. And I think the main emotion that people have to deal with to end the wars is pain, because from pain comes anger, and from anger comes these actions, which
Hatred.
these hatred. This it's
Hmm.
basically it clouds your judgment, and you tend to make decisions that you wouldn't normally do, because I don't believe people are truly evil. Like people are truly evil, no matter what their actions are. Deep down, everyone is has values. They have a certain level of humanity and empathy. It's just how we are born. I don't think people are born evil. I mean, you can look at it from, like, when you look at a baby. When you look at this baby, you don't think like this person is gonna become a killer one day, because they that's not how they are. We are not born that way. It's more of the environment and the circumstances that surround us as we are growing up that change and evolve our mentality and make us commit these kind of decisions. It's just festering of pain and hatred and anger. So yeah, that's my
Well, Said.
opinion on it.
When
Said.
you say that's amazing, Shaker. Go ahead.
No, I'm saying, yeah, I was saying Said for office.
Dude, I would love to see it, man. But yeah, don't get corrupt, man. Yeah,
Bro, I have
exactly.
no
One of
reason to
the
be
good
corrupt. I don't. I
folks
don't
out
like.
there.
I don't like the fast cars. I don't like the money. I don't like any of that shit. It's not. It's not worth it. Still,
That's
it's really
good.
not worth it.
Oh man, yeah, exactly. Hopefully in the future, we'll get make the change ourselves. Be the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shakir, I have one story to ask you about the Beirut blast. Where were you? What were you up to? How did that turn out for you? What was your experience?
I
Said
had
was
just
there too.
yeah,
Hmm.
I had just arrived in Beirut. I was at my hotel room and went up to the rooftop. Explosion goes off. Uh,
Oof.
Luckily, no one got hurt. Well, one person, the owner of the hotel, had a few fractures and a few people had some wounds. But I mean, one of the biggest crimes that has been committed against an entire population, against a city, and the reason is corruption and terrorism, and it's a sad thing and it's tragedy, and it's a tragedy that people are still living with and still fighting for justice for those they lost.
Who did it?
Yeah.
I wish we can have like I wish I can give you an answer to this, but
Oh,
I mean, who did it? Whoever was storing all these nitrates in a port.
mm, we
I
don't
mean,
know who. Mm.
We we
go
can
ahead,
always point
tell me.
fingers, but
Yeah, no, I
we can
I
never
mean,
say with
every
100%
every
certainty.
person who knew about the nitrates, who stored them, who got them, who it's a lot of people involved, and
Mm.
I hope this
Yeah.
case, keeps moving in the right direction so that all these people are legally exposed, legally charged, legally held responsible.
100%. What do you
I
think, Said?
I just have one final question, which is completely like off topic, but what do you think about a comedian being president?
You mean the Ukraine?
No, no.
You're
Oh,
talking about Zelensky.
Ukraine but that's not what I was referencing. But in general, what do you think about a comedian being president?
Well, if I read the headline, a comedian who became president, I would be like, brilliant. We will have a president who has a good sense of humor, and people with a good sense of humor are good negotiators. They bring good energy. That's what I would think.
Exactly. They're spreading positivity, so they
Yeah,
tend to, so they can also spread positivity in office.
absolutely. And I'm a big fan of Zelensky, if that's also a hint to another question.
Yeah, it's interesting how though we like listen to comedians, for like advice, and then we laugh at the politicians for being silly. It's such a strange world we live in. Ideally, I feel like you'd have someone run for office who is politically trained and is smart and sophisticated and is a
Mhm.
good negotiator by training, not by improv. you know?
I was
Yeah,
actually
for
having
sure.
this. I was having this conversation with my parents yesterday about the people in power, politicians specifically, and they are a mirror image of the people themselves, because And then who's putting them in power? Whether you're voting them or not, who's giving them the power? Who's giving them the authority over the general population?
Mhm.
It's the people themselves. They are the ones who have the actual authority to remove these people from those positions or vote them off, especially in the democratic countries. In the end, you have to be aware of how you are voting and who you are voting, and also the timing as well. It's like
Mhm.
when you're voting.
Absolutely. Again, you should run for office.
Woo! Say you speak very politically, but
Well,
I agree.
I have one more question about like getting healthy. Used to be a lot more heavier than you are now, and so how did you get to the good shape that you are now? Now that you're taking these wonderful shirtless photos right here, you got to be in a certain range to do that. Yeah.
well, no, I'm very like strict with health for the last few years. Like my food, my daily workouts, yoga, a lot of sports. Yeah, I find it important. I find it part of who I am in my 30s, and I'm loving it.
How did that change for you though, from when you were younger?
I
Yeah.
can I can now take shirtless pictures.
So what, you're doing sports, you're running, you're just eating a lot cleaner now than you
Eating
used
a
to.
lot cleaner, running, yeah, running pretty much every day now. It depends how
Nice.
my knees are doing my workouts. Yeah, it's daily, and it's part of the routine.
You're running what, on a treadmill or just outside, or what's the
Depends
deal?
where I am, but mostly
Hmm.
treadmill. Sometimes in some cities I would run outdoors, and I love it. It depends how polluted the city I'm in.
And for food, are you planning your own meals, making your own meals, or you get
What? No,
help with
I
that,
don't
or?
cook. I'm like zero at cooking. I don't even know how to fry an egg. So I either eat out or get food delivered, and it's always healthy options.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm very interested in like the routines of like authors and different kinds of people, like how you get in the mojo because you're always working, you're always writing, you're always being creative, and so you want to have a lifestyle that supports that for you. And
Yeah,
I'm
and you have
sure fast food doesn't support that really,
no,
maybe.
no, no. I zero food.
Well,
Wow.
this has been a podcast and a half. It's been great. Shaka,
Thank
we went basically this whole podcast itself was like a story. Was another book for you.
you started with music and ended with that.
We started with music. We went with to politics, to refugees. We ended with health and fitness. This has been great.
Great. Message me, guys, on Instagram to know your
Yes, please,
person.
Shakir, let everyone know how they can get in contact with you. How can they find your info? How can they get your books?
Well, you have to tell me, or
Ali, we gotta stop with the Dirbake.
Where can people find you, Shakir?
in your derbaki. No, well, I'm on. I live in the 2020s. I'm everywhere. I'm on Instagram. I'm in every shop out there, and these days it's not hard to find someone. So if you can find me, there's a problem.
So
Gotcha.
yeah, guys, Chaker Khazal, Chakeer, and then Khazal. Look him up, find him, and thank you for
Thank you.
watching A to the show. This is us.
We're
Peace.
out of here.
Bye
Woo!
bye.